right, welcome into the Psych with Mike library. Last week you were, as they say, on assignment.
Well, I was in Miami for a medical conference.
Yeah. Well, we talked about you being in Miami and being in paradise, and I was stuck here.
It was very hard to come back here, yeah.
And so this will be your first time on the new and improved YouTube show.
But I thought the symbolism of having me represented by a stack of intellectual books, although I couldn't read any of the titles.
I was going to say, you don't know that they were intellectual.
I don't know that, yeah.
But it did enhance the perception that you were very intelligent.
It almost made me feel real.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah. Well, I actually thought that turned out really well. I was surprised by how well the sound turned out and everything. So again, that was, a proof of concept, but I thought that went really well. So we will continue to do that from now on. One of the things that I did want to start the show with, again, just shameless plug, since we're going to be on YouTube, you know how that works. If you like the show, please like the videos and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us out. But if you still enjoy listening to the show,
don't say anything about that.
Exactly. If you don't like the show, though, don't dislike the video. But if you enjoy listening to the show as a podcast, you can still do that. Nothing's going to change with that. But, if you do catch us on YouTube and you enjoy it, then please show us some love. So speaking of love.
Nice segue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a professional. Did you know that?
I've heard that, yeah.
So I found an article. It says the secret reason why sex is so crucial to relationships. Oh, that's not the one that I wanted to start with. It's Sex and Our Psychological Needs. And this is by a guy named Mark Manson. And
is that Marilyn Manson's brother?
I believe it's his cousin.
Okay.
I don't know that. I'm just making that up. But for all those of you who know Mark Manson and say, "Oh my God, that's a joke." But what the article goes on to talk about is that there really is no biological reason why people need to have sex.
That depends. Let's define sex. Because I'm thinking of the Bryce Harlow monkey experiment about the monkeys that didn't experience any touch or touch affection died. They shrivel up and die. And if you're talking about sex as touch, or sex as affectionate hugging, or sex as digital penetration, I think it makes a difference. It's the Bill Clinton defense. what the meaning of is. So when you talk about is sex necessary for life? If you're talking about intercourse, I think we have agreement that it's not. You can live a long time without having intercourse. But I don't know how long you can live without having intimacy and touch.
Well, you may be able to physiologically live, but I don't know how good your relationship would be or how happy you would be.
So living versus quality of life?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. But, I think that the article really, while it makes a point that sex is not a biological imperative and that there are actually some diseases which can be associated with sex, I think those things are true. But I think that what we're talking about is something that is more profound than just the need to actually engage in the physical act.
But again, I think we end up talking about emotions and intimacy and relationships and then morality and appropriateness and fantasy. There's so many ingredients that you can't reduce it down. I don't believe you can just reduce it down to saying, should you have it in order to live or can you live without it? There's so many evidences of people who don't have it available in their lives but still manage to live. But the quality of life or the quality of relationships has to be considered, I think.
And so what is it about that touch that is important?
I think there's physiological evidence that shows that touch will increase your level of oxytocin production.
Exactly.
And oxytocin we call the feel-good hormone.
So you're always giving me trouble about the biology, but...
Yeah, well, I'm learning more and more that biology is relevant.
Yeah.
I like to think that it's not, but it is. And so I think intimacy, touch as an expression of appropriate intimacy, is of critical importance in our life, whether it's holding hands. I mean, you see old people in nursing homes, and sometimes the nursing homes have restrictions on access for privacy because sex might happen. People don't want grandma being in a sexual relationship with somebody down the hallway that the family doesn't know about. But the data shows clearly that if they have an opportunity to hold hands, to sit next to each other, to put their arms around each other, to even fondle each other, that they thrive better than if they don't.
And this is a pet peeve of mine. You know this, other people may not know this. I actually studied gerontology. I have a graduate certificate in gerontology. And one of the things that is infuriating to me is that we, in our society, tend to treat older people the same way we treat children.
Yes,
and we
absolutely.
think of them cognitively in the same kind of terms. Well, we have to protect older people because they don't know how to take care of themselves, which is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Now, if somebody is legitimately cognitively impaired and they're being abused, that is a completely different situation. But if grandma is in the nursing home and wants to have sex with some guy down the hall, who cares?
I think I have no research to support this. Is my own bias, but I think it's all about money and not about sex. I think that the families are concerned that old couples in nursing homes might decide that they're in love with each other, especially if they're old enough to come from a generation that was taught and continues to believe that you don't have sex outside of marriage. That if they want to have sex, then they have to get married, and then that screws up everybody's inheritance.
All of the assets
all the assets
messed up. I know.
Do they get commingled? Do they get stolen by grandkids that you never even met, from another state, from another wife? It just is complicated.
And I agree that is the motivation.
It's not about intimacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, but that is absolutely what is important, is that physical touch increases those levels of oxytocin, which makes us feel better. It's the same reason why we like interacting with young children, because when you engage in that social reciprocity with young children, like you smile, the child smiles, you smile back, and all of that raises your oxytocin levels. Those things tend to increase what are called pro-social behaviors. So you tend to do nicer things. You tend to go out and look at the world more objectively, more optimistically. Your mood increases. Your stress levels decrease. It's just a great, great thing. And it all goes back to exactly what you were talking about in the Harlow experiment.
Well, and I think, too, our society has really gotten skewed away from openness to touch by people that aren't intimately connected in your life. I mean, we rarely touch strangers anymore, and there's a huge amount of concern about adults touching children, how they touch them. Is it sexualized? Is it invasive? Is it offensive? But I think it's the same thing with adults touching old people. Providers in those nursing homes, part of their job is to pet and pat and stroke some of the old people who might be in pain. And that touch is soothing.
Absolutely.
When you're in hospice, that's a large part of what happens. And as you recede away from life in hospice care, one of the last things that they figure is helpful is somebody stroking your hair, your forehead, patting your shoulder, rubbing your feet. And that's not sexual.
And after World War II, there were a lot of experiments that were done in the United States on children of people who went off to war and didn't come back, or people who were going off to war and had children and then didn't return to those families.
Right.
There were a lot of kids, that's the baby boom generation, a lot of those kids, or a disproportionate number of those individuals during that period of time, started out as orphans, or at least to single parents. And so some of them were in institutions, and they started looking at what was the effect of being institutionalized. And one of the things that was told to the caregivers in these institutions was not to hold these infants, because they didn't want them to form attachments if they were going to be adopted out. And they found that 20%...
Reactive attachment disorder.
Well, and 20% of them actually suffered biological disorders like what used to be called mental retardation. I know that that's not a politically correct term, but was when we were in school and for a long time. It's now called called pervasive developmental disorder. So individuals who grew up with real effects to their biology and to their IQ that had no reason for existing other than these kids just weren't touched.
Which goes back to the Bryce Harlow experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what ignited the Bryce Harlow experiments. They started thinking about, well, what is it about attachment? And they found that tactile stimulation. So Bryce Harlow put monkeys in a cage with a wireframe mom and a cloth mom, and they found that the monkeys, even if they were fed by the wireframe mom, would always prefer tactile contact with the cloth mom. And so that soothing, like you're saying, with the elderly population, just the physical touch just makes such a profound difference in a person. And that's what about sex, not the actual mechanical act of sex, but that touching. And so that touching can happen whether you're actually physically having sex or, like you said, you're just holding hands or you're hugging. A lot of people say don't hug your clients in psychotherapy today. I hug a lot of my clients, and especially my young males. I hug not 3, but my adolescent males, because in a lot of cases, that is the only physical contact, and certainly the only physical contact that they're having with a male role model that these guys ever get.
Right.
And it is transcendent what happens to them when they feel like it is, I am okay enough that somebody else in the world wants to have physical contact with me.
Until the last 15 years or so, coaches used to do a lot of that. And they don't so much anymore because they've all been taught with school programs like Protecting God's Children, don't touch anybody in any way because it could be misinterpreted or misconstrued and you could be in trouble and lose your job.
And I do struggle with that because, people who are in the audience may not know, but you and I were actually intimately involved in the Protecting God's Children program here in St. Louis. And that was one of the things that we were a part of developing, was this idea that we had to have a certain set of rules that was universally observed. Otherwise, it's difficult for the kids to know, well, why is it okay for coach to touch me, but not okay for this guy down the street to touch me? Yeah. And I understand that, and I don't want to muddy the waters. I think that there is a difference, and maybe it's just my own egocentrism, in the therapeutic relationship than there is in some of those other relationships. Yeah. But at the same time, if someone said to me, hey, Mike, I don't really want you touching those kids, and they're not kids, they're adolescents, they're young adults, but, I would be okay with hearing that argument.
Well, but in the whole Protecting God's Children development of that program, we discussed a lot about how do you teach children what constitutes safe touch, appropriate touch, a location on the body, the cueing from the toucher. Actually read an article this morning that children between the ages of 3 and 5 are very acutely perceptive in terms of seeing the faces of people they don't know and knowing which of those people are safe versus not safe, or approachable versus not
because of the nonverbal
cueing, and that before they develop the language to understand all that, they already know to recognize if something's not right. So what we want to teach the children today is if it doesn't feel right, don't let it happen. Don't do it, or stop somebody from doing it. But I think it's a mistake and a loss to our culture that men now have to worry. Like, I love babies of any age. I like to play with them, I like to talk to them, interact with them, I like to touch them. But I have to think about what will the parents think, or what will witnesses think if I'm just a dirty old man, or is it grandfatherly type affection that's appropriate. So, having to think about that is an awkwardness that interferes with the naturalness of it.
Right. So getting back to adult relationships, then one of the articles that I looked at in looking at material for the show was an article that talked about the kinds of people that we get attracted to. And I was really interested in this article because, and just FYI, I will add the links for all of the stuff that we talk about, all of the resource material that we're talking about on the show in both the podcast and the YouTubes. But I'm really interested in this idea of what are the kinds of people that we're attracted to. And the reason is because I have so many of my clients who come to me and they're talking about that they've been in the same kind of bad relationship over and over and over again. And when they get into these relationships, when they meet these individuals, whether it's males or females, when they meet this person originally, they think, oh, this person's completely different from anybody I've ever dated. And they're the same kind of emotionally unavailable, or the same kind of substance abuser, or the same kind of physical abuser as the people that they've dated throughout the course of their life. And what I say to people is, what you may have to think about is that your attachometer is miscalibrated.
Yeah, well, a good example of that, I saw an interview with Kelsey Grammer, who played Frasier. And he had horrible loss experiences as a child, lots of death in his family, his parents and siblings and so on. And he grew up and he had 4 marriages. And he said the first 3 marriages were all the same woman with the same issues. And he had to learn that what was attracting him to these people were the loss issues in his life and the negative experiences that he'd had, instead of things that could be healthy and positive for him. And so he had to learn to make a difference. And so he now thinks his 4th marriage is going to last and endure because it's a totally different type of person.
Right. And so did he ever talk about how he found this person, or was it just serendipity?
In that particular interview, he did not.
Okay. So one of the things that I go over with people that I try and work on is this idea that your attachometer may be miscalibrated. And so what you have to do is to think in terms of what would be your ideal partner. And a lot of them can talk to me about people in their lives, either currently or that they had known previously, that checked all of the tick boxes that they would like to have in a partner, but they just weren't attracted to. And I said, that's the person you're supposed to be with. But I'm not attracted to them. Yeah, but the people that you're attracted to end up being dysfunctional relationships. So you may have to force yourself into a relationship with a person that you may not necessarily be attracted to, because in the end, that may be the best relationship for you. And if it is, you will learn to be attracted to that person.
Yeah. I've had the same conversation with clients, and the issue is, do you give somebody an opportunity to get to know them enough to trust them and enjoy them?
And the trust is what's important, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think limiting yourself to physiological attraction, oh wow, I love her eyes, is not enough to make an intimate commitment to somebody over time. I mean, that may be an ingredient that matters to you, but I think you have to look deeper.
So in this article, the article is The Secret Reason Why Sex is So... That's not it again. The article was... Human connections start with a friendly touch. And one of the things that this article was talking about was that people get attracted to each other because of either 2 different reasons, or we have the concept that relationships are sustainable for 2 different reasons, either because birds of a feather flock together or because opposites attract. And the premise of the article was that people tend to have better outcomes if their personalities are more similar, and I'm not sure that I agree with that.
Well, I remember the multiple conversations with clients about what I regard as ignorant idea that somebody somewhere in the world was made especially and uniquely for me by God. And my job is just go find them. And it totally denies the validity of the proximity theory. If you fall in love with somebody that you're near, that you're next to, that's in your environment. So what if you're in America and this person that God made for you is in India,
right,
and you never go to India and she never comes here?
Right.
Then what do you do? Spend the rest of your life without anybody in your life? I just don't. I think there are multiple possibles that you could experience a good relationship with and a happy life with. Your job is to find them and weed them out. And I mean, in our culture, you have to just have one.
And ultimately, I think that the biggest issue is that issue of trust. And, I have a client right now who is in college at a university that is a university that a lot of people from St. Louis go to, the University of Missouri, Columbia. And he didn't have a lot of dating opportunities in high school, and he was really, really upset about that. And we always said, hey, when you go to college, it's going to be a new start, and things are going to turn around. And he's now met this girl, and originally when she approached him and said that she was interested in him, he wasn't attracted to her. But I encouraged him to at least give the relationship a chance and just see what happened. And now he said that he's beginning to trust her, and all of a sudden she's a lot prettier.
Yeah.
So trust really, really is the essential ingredient that makes people attracted to each other. And I believe that when you are in a genuinely, sincerely trusting relationship, that other person is going to be very attractive to you, even if they weren't before.
I think you may be onto something, but I also think we're biological beings.
That's true.
Lust
Yeah.
gets in the way of any of that stuff. So if you experience a lustful sensation with regard to somebody, you're going to look at them much more positively than if you're looking at somebody that just feels like you can trust them.
Well, and that is a great segue into the last article that I wanted to talk about, and that was the article on Sternberg's triadic theory of love. So I know that you are very familiar with this. It's something that we are taught in graduate school. Everybody who's ever taken a psychology or sociology class probably knows who Robert Sternberg was and about his triadic theory. And in Sternberg's theory, basically what he said is that you have three components of an attached relationship. You have passion, which is that lust. You have intimacy, which is the friendship component of it. And then you have commitment, which is obviously the commitment to stay together. And in his theory, he always said that if you were going to sacrifice one of those but still have a really, really good, sustainable relationship, the thing that a relationship can survive without is passion.
That's what he said.
Yeah, you don't believe that. You're not buying that.
I think passion can be nurtured, even in older people, that they can still feel, have a libido and feel sexual arousal and desire and a transported experience when being sexual with somebody that they love.
And I don't disagree with that at all. And I would never want to live in a dispassionate relationship myself. Right. But I also know that I can't project that bias onto the clients that I see, because I've seen a lot of clients who live in intimate, committed relationships that don't have a lot of passion, and those relationships are very good and very sustainable. But
then with those clients, do you have the discussion about what constitutes passion and what can you do to nurture passion?
Well, and what they still have is intimacy. So they still hold hands in public. They still hug each other. They're still getting physical touch, even if they aren't having copious amounts of sexual intercourse.
Well, let's come back and do another conversation about sex and touch and intimacy that has more time and more specifics to examine it. Because I think that's just something I don't want to brush right past.
Okay. All right. Well, we will revisit this in the future then. Again, if you enjoy the show, then please like the Facebook and like the videos on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. That will really help us out. As always, the music that appears on Psych with Mike is written, arranged, and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. Thank him for that contribution to the show. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.